We've all had moments where we've been averse to some type of a change or another throughout our lives. Normally, it's in the form of loss, like losing a job or a loved one, but sometimes it's just a simple response of seeing someone that's maybe dressed in a way that we don't really jive with, or uh, doing something we don't really understand and thinking, like, oh, that's weird. But while that reaction is natural, it's something that more or less needs to be kind of pushed past in a lot of instances. However, there's an entire ideology around this simple human response of fear of the unknown, and that is conservatism. Hey everyone, my name is Christian Verstappen, and I have a lot to say about many things. I want to talk about how conservatism is a natural human evolutionary response, but it's something that we we just need to be able to move past in a lot of different aspects. What do I mean by this? Well, throughout human evolution, it became very imperative and understandable to fear what is different. Animals, food, people of different tribes is where we get racism from. Anything that wasn't in the in group and wasn't directly a part of you or your family or your tribe was understandably something that was seen as dangerous, seen as a potential threat. But as society has expanded more and people have amalgamated more and more together, and we've had all sorts of different cultures and ideologies and ways of being and all of those things come together, we get to a point where we really need to drop a lot of those archaic ideas. Again, they make perfect sense, and I don't think that anybody is inherently like wrong or bad in any capacity for having the initial response of like, oh, that's strange, that's weird, I don't understand this, and that's fine. Best way to understand something, of course, or someone, is to talk to them, get to know them. A common myth that conservatives like to say these days is, oh, well, if you were around all these, these gay people or these black people or whatever, you'd hate them too. When what we find in reality is that people who are more in mixed groups of people, seeing different ways of life and being and all this stuff, they tend to be more respectable, or more respective and more accepting of people's different ways of being. Why? Because exposure therapy. The fear of a gay person or someone of a different race, or let's not even say a gay person, a trans person more likely these days, is just as irrational as someone like me who is arachnophobic. I have a irrational fear of spiders. The thing is, though, I can acknowledge that that is irrational and work to move past it. Through a lot of that is, or a lot of what I've done to try to get past that is exposure therapy. Now, I want to be clear. I am not comparing trans people or any minority group to that of like creepy, crawly bugs. That is not my point. My point is to say my fear of those creatures is just as irrational as people who fear minority groups. That is to say that through exposure, through understanding these people, you come to realize they're really not any different than a cis straight person. This mentality of people needing to keep to their own, or this mentality of, again, just really fearing what is different, is natural. It is ingrained in our survival instincts, but it's something that we need to push past, because I have a simple philosophy, which is there's not a one size fits all way to live life. I very much believe that we all have to find our own way in all aspects of life. And whatever works for you might not work for somebody else. A seemingly more benevolent way that a lot of people talk about these kinds of things and kind of force conservatism in a way onto people is tradition. Oh, you have to have this kind of wedding. You have to dress this kind of way. You have to do this kind of thing. Why? Why? Well, because that's traditional. That's how the people before me did it. Okay. I'm not the people before you. We are not the people before you. We are literally, like, categorically, those are the people before us. We are the people after. We are different. And that's okay. Everything changes over time. Now, I say this as somebody who I have been very resistant to change throughout most of my life. Becoming more accepting of change is something that, and this is why I say it's something we have to work through, because I don't mean that in like a snobby way, as in like, oh, we need to get over it. Conservatives need to get over it. I mean, you have to actively work to get past that disgust response, that fear, and it's not just with minorities. Minorities are like the most common and the most, it causes the most harm when it happens in that regard. But it's things like, I have had many experiences where I've had favorite artists and actors, people that I've looked up to, where they've changed something about their appearance or the way that they made music or whatever it was, and I didn't like it, and I had like a natural like pushback to where I was like, oh, I don't like this, right? I was very much the kind of person growing up who believed that, oh, all the good music was made in like the 50s, 60s, maybe 70s, but I never really got into like 70s rock. And like all the new stuff is like terrible. Where did that mentality come from? That was something that was like pushed on me from other people. The idea of old good, new bad. Now, a lot of this has to do with nostalgia, and I want to make a video as well on how like um we need to not be blinded by nostalgia and be aware that like the same things people complain about have always been the same. Like, you got to think about how people who grew up in like the 70s and 80s dealing with the conservatism of their parents who wanted them to behave and dress and all these different things a certain way, and dealing with that and rebelling accordingly, didn't have that wherewithal a lot of the times to carry that on with and like have that self-awareness when they had kids. And we see it to this day. I see it with my own generation. I was born in 97, like late millennial, early Gen Z. And I remember getting out of high school and people saying kids these days. And I was like, we just got out of high school. We are way too young to be saying kids these. We still are. Like, what are you talking about, man? We just got out of high school. We just stopped being kids. What are you talking about? This is insane. But a lot of people fail to have that self-awareness and realize that, okay, so the generations before me, like, okay, give you a perfect example. The Beatles, very respected by a lot of especially older people these days, right? The Beatles, Elvis Presley, stuff like that back in their day, they were rebels. They were the woke artists. The Beatles got canceled originally because John Lennon said they were bigger than Jesus, which at the time he might have been more popular. I don't know. The band might have been more popular. I don't know. Especially in that. But anyway, it led to like burning of records and all these different things, and the Beatles had to basically go on this apology tour and all this stuff. Artists have always been people who have shaped the culture and have changed the culture. What's so insane to me is that, and maybe I am getting a little, maybe I'll just wrap this all up together. It's insane to me that people don't realize that what older people now that complain about like kids these days or whatever about like technology or or media these days, or whatever it is, right? How the stuff they grew up with went through the same kind of scrutiny, and it survived because it was good art, it was made by talented people, and it sustained because people enjoyed it. It's the same thing where, like, nowadays we'll see things all the time where, like, you'll get cult classics of movies and TV shows and such that were panned by audiences and critics years ago, especially stuff that has had a younger audience. Now, as we're growing up, this is why we're seeing things like the resurgence of shows that were running throughout the 90s and the 2000s, because now we've grown up and we are making that stuff, and that's why you're seeing like video essays and stuff on things like Disney and Nickelodeon sitcoms and all these different things, and analysis and all these different all this stuff, because people are growing up with that, having reverence for it, and wanting to talk about it. Now, if those same people who understand that, like, okay, the stuff we loved was panned by like audiences of the day, let's not do that to new things like, I don't know, Steven Universe or Owl House or some show. I know that's like 10 years ago, but like, I don't know, like, that's still, you know, past my age of watching cartoons on TV. Just be aware of have that self-awareness to be able to push against that stuff. And the idea, so many conservatives have the idea that either things need to stay the same and not change, or we need to go backwards, which is insane, because it's like, these are the people who would have been, and many of them are now, arguing for like child labor in factories, or, let's be real here, even things such as like slavery of other enslavement of other human beings. This stuff, if we look at, if we ever stop and we say, okay, this is good enough, we don't need to go any further, why? What if there were people saying that during women's suffrage? There were people saying that during the civil rights. There have always been people who have either wanted things to stay and never change, or for things to go backwards for an imaginary time that they thought was so much better. And look, I love like 50s and 60s culture. I reference Elvis and the Beatles for a reason. I love that stuff. I love the rock and roll, the music, a lot of the entertainment, like the vibe, the style, all that. Don't love the social and political climate of the day. Not that great. But you know, and it's okay to take things of days gone by and say, like, okay, we really like these things. Like, maybe we like this style, or we like the way cars were back then, or the way music, or like all these different things. Like, that's fine, that's great. But to insist on this idea that we need to go back to like the golden age is ridiculous, because there were always problems. And there are always problems in every generation anyway, just like there are always problems in whatever stage of life that you're in. Nothing is ever perfect. We're always moving forward, pressing on, and hopefully trying to make things better for ourselves and everybody else. One of the big things that taught me this as well, and this I am going to do like its own video on, was getting into comic books. I've talked many times before about how I've, you know, and have even done like a few, as I call, rambling review series on a few different comic things, and those will continue. But when I first started deciding to read comic books, it was for two reasons. One, I was really tired of the way they were like doing a lot of these characters in general and adaptations, and one of those big things was race changes. I don't even like saying race swapping, because race swapping implies that like there's only two races. But changing someone's race or hair color or whatever it was. Now, in my defense, I was consistent about this, and I didn't like when they did something like, say, in the Superman movie, they made Lois Lane a ginger. She's supposed to be a brunette. That is, you know. But when I got into comics, it was because I wanted to see what I thought and bought into, as many of these conservatives will tell you, the less woke version of this stuff, because this was before you know, this is part of how comics helped, like, in a way, made me become more progressive. Because what I ran into was the reality that these comics were always changing. There was no consistent, like, way that a character always looked, or way that a character always acted, or any of these different things. You had in the Golden Age, in Silver Age, you had characters like, again, I'll use Superman as an example. His like powers and stories and everything were constantly changing. So many things we think about him that are as if we think have always been part of his lore, like the fact that he can fly. No, he originally jumped. He didn't fly. Kryptonite didn't exist, but the point is, and it's not even just good things like adding new powers that we've accepted. But there was a time where like things were so crazy and all over the place, it was ridiculous. It's why in the 80s DC had to do a basically massive reboot and universe reset with the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. They rebooted a few times, and I have issues with the way comics say they do reboots, because to me they're not real reboots, but hey, that's, again, another video for another time. The point is, comics and understanding media adaptations in general helped me to realize none of this stuff has ever been consistent. Adaptations are always changing things. Not even just adaptations, but like in the world of comics, comics themselves are always changing. Life is always changing. People are always changing. And we have two options in this world. We can either accept and embrace that change, or we can fight against it and be left in the dust. That's just evolution. That's what real survival of the fittest is. Do we adapt and accept and embrace, or do we get lost to the dustbin of history? It's a choice we all must make. And again, it's a choice we must make, and we have to actively make. It's not passive. You don't passively accept something, or passively become more accepting and understanding and more tolerant and all that. You have to work toward it. So don't feel bad if you have a natural response of, oh, that's weird. Maybe it is. But allow yourself to take it further. Okay, I don't like that. But does that mean it's bad? No, it's just different. But we've always been making things different from the people that came before us, before them, and so on. And it'll happen with the next generation and the next generation, and so on and so forth. Just the way society works, the way people work. We're always creating and innovating and changing, and not just with technology, but socially, and the way we express ourselves, and all these different things. And it's really one of the things that makes humanity so beautiful, in my opinion. So, yes, conservatism and fear of the unknown is natural, but we need to be able to work past that in order to become more accepting of others, and really just have a better life with ourselves, for ourselves, and for and with others in general. Because again, if we don't, we're just going to be left behind. And if you yourself are more progressive, understand that for many of us, it's a journey. People don't change overnight, and when somebody has the natural human response of the knee-jerk reaction to think something is bad or weird because it's different, maybe don't judge them for it, but kind of nudge them in the right direction and help them to explore that thought further. Challenge that thought of, oh, that's bad. Well, why? Okay, let's think about this. Let's talk about this. I understand it's not always going to be feasible in many instances, sadly, but when it can be, and oftentimes, more often than not, I'd argue it is, do that. Challenge that. Because if we don't challenge those beliefs and that knee-jerk reaction, there are going to be plenty of other people ready to latch onto them and completely validate their beliefs and make them even more extreme. We gotta watch out for each other with that. As always, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below. Follow me on social media for more. Subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date. Leave a like if you like. And if not, I hope you find something to do like. Take care of each other out there, guys. Peace and love.